Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is actually not Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, but this is Police Off the Cuff, the Law and Crime Author Series. And we have a really outstanding author on the queue today. And he's been on before. He's not actually a frequent flyer, but I think you're going to recognize him. And I'm going to introduce him. I'm going to keep you in suspense till I introduce him. But he's a prolific writer of the true crime genre. However, he not only is a great author, but he, as we say, he can talk the talk and he can walk the walk. Well, he walked the walk for years as a Brooklyn prosecutor, the head of the homicide bureau in the Brooklyn DA's office. And then he was in charge of Rackets. So he's got an unbelievable amount of experience in that area. Plus, organized crime. He's like an organized crime expert. And another plus to that is he's Italian. So he knows the ins and outs. He knows the culture. And he's a really interesting guy besides all of that. So I want to introduce to you guys author, retired or former Brooklyn prosecutor, Michael Vecchione. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Nice introduction. You hit it right on the head. I have been in that courtroom and in that DA's office for 30 years, and I learned a lot. I absorbed a lot, and now I'm writing about the things that I did and the things that I know about. Thank you for having me once again.
Mike, can you imagine though, like even when you talk about great actors, great writers, great athletes, all of those things, you have to live your life in order to do that. Because to be a great writer, you have to have those things in life to draw upon, that you have those experiences, you felt those experiences, so that you can impart them to your reading audience in a way that's believable and that the person can feel and touch and taste and all of that stuff and smell what you put on paper.
Yeah, absolutely right. Bill, I've done a lot of these podcasts. I've done a lot of talks, library talks to groups all over Long Island, and I get this question a lot. The question is, where does your inspiration come from? So I say, it's not really inspiration. It's basically my life. It's what I did and what I experienced over those 30 some odd years in the DA's office, and another 10 when I was in private practice. So I have a lot of things to draw on, and those instances, those experiences, all become part of what I'm writing.
And Mike, it's also the growing up in Brooklyn, the culture you grew up in,
No doubt, no doubt.
understanding, the motivations of people, whether the motivations be good or bad, you understand it. You're a Hofstra University law grad too, also at a Long Island law school, right?
Yes,
And
I was living in Queens before that. I had just moved to Queens with my family, but I was a Brooklyn guy up until the time I was 19, 20 years old, and then went to Hofstra. And I'm proud to say, I was part of the first class of Hofstra's new law school at the time, and it was quite an experience. I got very lucky because the class was small, and law school is a completely different animal than college, and things are taught differently, and the way that you study is different. So with a small group of people, I developed several friends. We developed a study group, and that's how I got through law school. I got through law school with several other guys that I studied with, and it was a really interesting experience. But one of the things that I did while I was in law school was I was an intern at the Brooklyn DA's office. I knew a detective who was working there, and he put it in my brain that this might be something you want to do, and I did it. I did it for a summer, and I have to tell you, Bill, I was hooked. I was hooked. I'll never forget the first time that I went to a crime scene with an ADA who I was working for at the time, and we didn't have to go very far. We walked down to the Brooklyn Heights, Brooklyn Heights promenade, where at the time a United States attorney who was the Eastern District United States attorney who lived on the promenade in an apartment building on the promenade, jumped out a window. And it was during the Watergate era. And the cops who were there when I got there, it was we're talking about this being somehow related to Watergate, that maybe he was killed, maybe he was pushed out. Turns out he had a disagreement with his girlfriend, and he was depressed over it, and he jumped out the window and killed himself. But I'll never forget that walk and being involved. I was now right in the shit, as they say. You know, I was right there with all of the detectives and agents, and it was an unbelievable experience. And from that point on, I knew what I wanted to do.
And you immediately loved it. You know, Mike, I'm going to get, and I'm going to talk about a few of your books, but I'm going to first
Yeah.
get to the book I think you want to talk about most right now, and that's Fallen Angel. On the screen right now, it's the one to the
Right.
left.
Yep.
And I'm going to read what they say on the Amazon page. There's a war for the very soul of Brooklyn, and the stakes are higher than ever. When perpetrators of particularly heinous and insidious crimes were acquitted after trial in an alarmingly large number across America, it caught the attention of a priest in the Vatican's Office of Exorcisms in New York, who noticed that all preceded satanic exorcisms. His shuddering conclusion: Satan must be directly responsible for the crimes and the aftermath. In the United States, the devil was winning and causing anarchy, chaos, and the destruction of life. The Fallen Angel series begins when Brooklyn becomes ground zero for the evil one, and prosecutor Michael Gioca, chief of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Rackets division, is handpicked by a secret government agency to take on and defeat the devil. In book one, Gioca gets the best of his evil adversary time and again, so Satan must up his game if he wants to succeed in his mission, the destruction of Brooklyn. For decades, family has been the cornerstone of the rich, vibrant life in Brooklyn, the borough of churches. Without it, life there would crumble. The evil one has recognized this and has taken aim at the essential institution. If you love crime, fantasy, and delving into the unknown, Fallen Angel, a true crime fantasy, book 2 tells the story of the war for the soul of Brooklyn. Will Satan succeed, or will Michael Gioca once again prevail? Wow, I want to read it after that opening. Pretty cool.
That was a great reading. Thank you very much. It's been terrific to write this book, this series. Actually, that's book 2. Book 1 came out last year, and when I finally was able to get this together and put a proposal on paper for the idea that I had, I gave it to a couple of my book agents who I had been working with on previous books, and they said to me, well, you can't sell. My original idea was short stories of true crime short stories, and I said, no, you can't really sell those. So think of a way to tie them together. And I had this idea for a long time. It came as a result of a case that I had done, and I said, let me give it a shot. And I put together a proposal, and I had gotten to know a publisher out here on Long Island, whose TV shows I had appeared on, pushing my other books. And I met with her and I sat down and I told her my idea, and she immediately said, wow, it sounds interesting. I like it. Just like the reaction that you just had. And she said, send me a proposal. So I said, well, I happen to have one with me. I reached into my briefcase and I handed it to her. And a few days later, I got a call from her. She said, not only do I like it, my editors love it. And I want you to do it. We want to give you a contract. But here's the but. Not one book, not 2 books. We want a series of 3 books, because this is the kind of thing that you can put into a series. And she gave me a 3-book contract, and I've done 1. You just put up the cover for 2, which just came out about 2 weeks ago, and I'm in the midst of writing 3 right now at this desk that I'm sitting at. I'm into
Wow.
about chapter 11 or chapter 12 of book 3. So the idea, Bill, is that I have so many stories and so many experiences and so many adventures, I like to call them, that that I needed a way to be able to to tell them. And when they said short stories don't don't work with true crime fans, I came up with this idea of tying them together, and so far it's worked. It's look, in fact, book one, I have an agent out in Hollywood who's been, pushing my works for TV and the movies, and I sent it out to him, and he loved it, and he gave it to an A-list writer out there who's been involved in TV series, and it's optioned now. And there's a pilot that has been written, and as soon as this actor strike is over, I'm hoping that we'll be able to, get it onto the screen. So, my luck was when the writer saw it and read it and wrote this pilot, the writer strike happened. So
Right.
he couldn't do anything with it. But now at least he's been working. Well, I shouldn't say that. Somebody has been working on the script and doing different little tweaks to it. And there's a third version of the pilot now, and I'm waiting to sit with him and my agent and go through it. So but it gives me, what it does, Bill, also, and you having been retired for a while and involved in all these adventures where you are as a homicide sergeant. I miss what I did. I really do. I miss being involved in the cases and doing the investigations with guys like you, or detectives who work in the DA's office. And so writing about this stuff now really kind of keeps me energized and keeps me busy, quite frankly. So,
Well, Mike, give it and the audience. I mean, we read that there's a war for the very soul of Brooklyn. The stakes are
right.
higher than ever. Give us one of the stories within this book, that why
Okay.
is Brooklyn threatened?
Well, I'll give you the first story in book two. Where, as we say in that synopsis, that Michael Gioca, the prosecutor, really does win virtually all of the cases that he goes against the devil in. And the devil has instigated some horrific crimes in book one. My idea was to kind of up this, and I took 4 cases in which a family was devastated by either the death of a parent or a death of a sibling or a friend. And the first one that I thought about was a case that I had gotten assigned to me by the DA's office, and it involved the death of a New York City firefighter. And I'll tell you the real story, and then I'll tell you what I did with it in terms of Fallen Angel. The firefighter responds to a fire behind what I called at that time sort of a local Home Depot kind of place. And they had behind the main building a storage garage shed kind of location, and it was used to work on their equipment and to storage and things of that nature. They had a guy that was working for them who was using that garage, unbeknownst to the owners of the location, as a place where he was cutting up stolen cars. He was using it as a chop shop on off hours. And he gets fired for another reason. He's let go, but he never gave back the key, and he was still using this location at night to to cut up cars that were being stolen, brought there, and he was taking them apart. This one situation, right after he was fired, he gets one of these cars, and he had to take down two. He gets 2 cars actually, and had to take down the gas tanks. And when he did that, he was really not that good at that part, at that particular job, and he spilled gasoline all over the floor of the garage. Now, the next day, he had yet another job, quote unquote, to do for a car theft ring. And the job was they had a wrecked, I forgot what kind of car it was. It was a high end car, maybe a Cadillac or a Lexus or something. They had a wrecked one, and they had one that was stolen. And this guy's job was to take the VIN number off the wrecked car and put it onto the stolen car. And then the stolen car was going to be sold out of the country. But they needed that VIN number to make it seem as if it was a legitimate car. While he was cutting that up, he was using a power saw, and the sparks were so prolific that they lit the gasoline fumes from the night before on fire, and the entire place went up. He goes out, he runs out with a friend of his who had been working with him. Firefighters show up. Firefighters think that there's someone else inside, and they go in. And as they go in, the roof collapses, and it collapses like this. And the firefighter was caught right in the vortex. He actually suffocated. That's how he died. They couldn't get the roof off him, the debris off him fast enough. And that was the case. And I got the case because the original prosecutor couldn't think of anything to charge him with other than trespassing or something, and stolen car, that kind of thing. And believe me, it was a big story in the city. And the DA calls me one day and says, listen, I know it's not your case, but it's going to be your case. I want you to think about what you can do with it. And I came up with this idea, this legal theory, that since the bad guy had been fired from his job, he no longer had the right to be in that garage. So he basically was in there illegally, and he was committing a crime inside. Now, that is the definition of a burglary. If you
Yes.
kill someone during the course of a felony, that's felony murder. So I came up with this theory and I presented it to my colleagues. They all thought I was out of my mind. They said, "Are you crazy? That's never going to fly." I said, "Well, I'm going to give it a shot." And I indicted the guy. I indict him for felony murder. And he gets two lawyers who were professors at Brooklyn Law School who come to me, and they say, "Mr. Vecchione, we understand what you did, but you're basically out of your mind. There's no court in the land is going to think that this case can stand." I said, "Okay, well, let's go to court and find out." Well, to make a long story short, I go to trial. The trial judge dismisses their motion. I go to trial. I convict them, and I'll tell you about that in this when I talk about the book. What I did, what was the kind of the coup de grace that got us to across the finish line. It went up to the appellate division. It went up to the Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York State. It stood. Everybody. So I basically proved everybody who was a skeptic wrong. Now, I took that, and by the way, his father, this guy's name was Louis Valentino. He was a hero firefighter. He was a hero in his neighborhood. He was the kid who grew up helping everybody in Red Hook. He lived in Red Hook. He was the best baseball player in his neighborhood, the best basketball player, football player. This guy was everything, and he joined the fire department for that reason. He wanted to become, he loved doing that kind of thing. And
Right.
And when he was killed, it was major news, particularly in Brooklyn. His father was the head of the Longshoremen's Union Health and Welfare Fund. And I got to know Mr. Valentino, Louis Valentino Sr. So and I know what this did to his family. He was he was into his marriage only 6 months. And when I tried this, when we delivered the summation, it was done the day before Thanksgiving. And Bill, the courtroom was filled with firefighters. Mr. and Mrs. Valentino and the wife of the dead firefighter were in the first row. And I began my summation with the whole idea of Thanksgiving, and that there would be a table, would be a seat missing at the Valentino table, etc. And I continued, but I glanced over at the audience, and these real rough and tough firefighters and everybody else, they were all crying. So I knew I had made it. So this was a case, Bill, that I said, I know what this did to his family. This is going to be my leadoff case in book 2, where the devil sets this whole thing up. And what he does, what Satan does in this case, is he gets this. It's not a Home Depot garage any longer. In my book, it's a garage attached to the rectory of a Catholic church. And the rectory is obviously the place where priests live. And the idea was for Satan to instigate this fire and burn down the rectory. That's really what he wanted to do. But the firefighters got there too fast. They asked the bad guy, "Is there anyone inside?" And the devil character who was with him leans over and whispers something in his ear. And the guy answers, yeah, 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 it's our other friend. He's in there. And they rush in, and then the roof collapses, etc.
Right.
Nobody was in there, Bill. There was no one in there. So what the devil accomplished was to devastate this Valentino family by instigating the death of their son. Now, let me just tell you about the end. So Gioca tries the case. It's going pretty well, but there's still this, the idea, in his mind, he could see that there might have been a little bit of an issue with the jury buying this whole idea of felony murder, and how is it that a guy using a saw could create this whole thing? So what I did was I had the fire marshals scour the city for the exact same car that he was working on. And we and Gioca had the actual power saw that he was using, and I had them find this car, and I had the fire marshals go to, and Gioca does the same thing, go to the car it was in a dump. It was not the dump, the city pound, the police pound. They found one, and he begins to cut the same part of the engine, and another fire marshal videotapes the whole thing. Bill, when I, Vecchione, and Gioca see this tape of these sparks, it was like a river. It was like a waterfall of sparks. And I knew that I could make use of that image when I summed up, and Gioca thought the same thing. And that's what did it for us. That's what did it for us. The jury told me afterwards, me, not Gioca, they told me afterwards that it's a good thing you showed that video, because that proved to us how lethal those sparks were, and that saw against the metal of the engine, and that got me the conviction. And
But Mike, the other thing is that the gasoline
yeah,
that had been poured on the floor, that was still it was fumes. It was
yes,
gaseous,
yes,
and
yes,
when
yes.
the spark hit,
I and Gioca had to learn a lot about certain things. One, I had to hire, and Gioca does the same thing. Hires an engineer, a structural engineer, as the expert witness to instruct him, and then instruct the jury as to how this building could collapse when the fire occurred basically in the middle of this entire square of garage. So he tells us, and I also found out, I knew from the fire marshals, that gasoline fumes are flammable. It doesn't have to be the gasoline, because the gasoline fell onto the floor the night before, but there were fumes still coming up as a result of it. So when he was hovering over this engine, underneath it was the old gasoline, but the fumes were still there from the night before, and that river of sparks ignited the gas fumes. What happened then is the fire then spread outward from that spot to the walls of the garage, and and it was made out of wood, of course, and went up, but the roof was supported by metal beams, big metal beams. But what happened was the heat was so intense that the metal beams twisted, and they lost their strength and the ability to hold the roof up. And that's how the roof collapsed. And that's how the firefighter died. So it was, I always used to tell my law students this, that when you have a case and there's something in it like this, structural engineering, or, sometimes DNA material or whatever it is, if you're not an expert for that short period of time while you have this case, and for when you try it, then you're doing your client and yourself a disservice, because you have to become as proficient in this area as you possibly can in order to sell the idea that this is what caused the fire, and this is what caused
right,
the
Mike?
death.
If you don't understand it, how is the jury going to understand it?
That's
So
correct.
you have to
That's correct.
explain it to them, and you can always bring in an expert.
Yes, yes, yes. You think about it, Bill, and you know this. You've done and been involved in many, many cases. we, the prosecutor, in this situation, we're the storytellers. We're and the educators. We're the ones who have to both educate the jury, keep their interest, and then tell this story that ultimately leads to this horrible ending, which is the death of somebody like Louis Valentino. So it was an amazing case, and it was one that didn't even begin. I was chief of trials at the time. I wasn't in homicide. I wasn't in rackets yet, but I had tried so many cases that the DA was frustrated because the mayor was on his back for, what are you doing? What's going on? You can't charge the guy with just a trespass or whatever it is they were going to do it. And did one thing, and I made a point of it because I had thought about this idea, but I couldn't really sell it to anybody until I actually went out there to the location, and I met with the owners of the building, owners of the business, and they're the ones who told me during the time I was interviewing them that this guy didn't belong there, that he had no permission to be in that place since they fired him, and that's what gave me, the last piece that I needed to do this. So
Absolutely. Mike, and being a prosecutor also, as well as even being a homicide detective or working in that field, you get to know and actually maybe even become fond of the family members of the
oh,
victims, and it's got to be heart wrenching. And and now translate to you becoming a writer, and you have that experience within you to explain the heartbreak and how you felt, whereas someone who's just a writer that may not have experienced being a prosecutor may be able to impart that, but not hasn't lived it like you have.
yep. That's correct. I lived this, Bill. You're right. You're right. I lived it. And getting back to the family for a second, you hit it right on the head. Mr. Valentino, I'll tell you a little bit of a little vignette at what happened. I during the time that I had the case, it hadn't. I don't think we had started trying it yet, but I was involved in hearings and all kinds of stuff. And Mr. Valentino and his family were in the courtroom every time we had the case was on the calendar. Well, I used to play basketball with the guys in the DA's office. We had a gym and a school near us, and we would play Thursday nights for several hours. And during this time that I had this case, I hurt myself. I landed on someone's foot, and I had a real problem. I was on crutches, and I had torn the plantar fasciitis tendon in my foot. And I'm in court one day, and Mr. Valentino's there, and he comes up to me to the rail, and he sees that I got crutches and stuff, and he asked me what happened. So I told him, and I needed, I needed these things. I needed to get around with them. So a few days later, I think it was around when we were starting the trial, I get a call from the front desk in the DA's office, the detective there. And he says, Mike, there's a guy here and he's got some things for you. And I said, all right, well, who is it? And he says, his name is Valentino. I said, okay, well, what's Mr. Valentino got? And he says, well, I'll bring him back to you. You know what he had? He brought me a set of brand new crutches and a cane so that I would not have to use anything that was not, I had these old wooden crutches that I had gotten from a doctor. I forgot where it was. He brought me all this new stuff. And I said to him when I saw him the next time, I said, Lou, what, it was unnecessary. He goes, no. He said it was necessary. You're taking care of my family. I'm going to take care of you. So it was unbelievable. That's how close. And then after the case was over, he throws us, the fire marshals, and I had an assistant DA working with me. He throws us this big party at a restaurant in Carroll Gardens, around where I later was living, and it was no expense spared. Believe me, it was terrific, and it was all because he was grateful that that I had done this and put in the work and took care of his family. As I'm leaving, he grabs me. We off to the side. He wanted to thank me again, and I said, Lou, you've done enough. He said, listen, if you ever think about running for DA in Brooklyn, he said, I've got the Longshoremen's Union behind me, and we're all behind you. So you let me know if you want to run for Brooklyn DA, and I'll back you up. So that's how close I got to this guy. And it, Bill, it's not the first time. In book one, I start off with a case involving the death of a young woman who was in New York from St. Louis. She was going to Columbia to get her master's in social work, and she was working in a um, uh, I guess it was a home for battered women in the Bronx. She lived in Brooklyn, and every night she had to get on the subway and ride to Brooklyn around Flatbush Avenue, Park Place, in that area. And she was coming down the block. Her block was I'll never forget this. It was a cold March night. Her block was very dark. And although the trees weren't in bloom, there were trees, and it was just a dark, and there was nobody on the street. And these three guys who had seen her leave the grocery store where she had stopped before she went home came up to her and accosted her, wanted her bag, and she wouldn't give it up. And the guy who was the leader had this big long knife, and he stuck it in her back, and
Ugh.
it was so he had put it in so hard that the tip of it came out under her left breast in the front of her. That's how unbelievable it was. So this was a young woman who was all by herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Giuliani was the mayor. The next day, Bill, it was blasted all over the news. She was, because of what her work was, because of her desire to get a master's in social work. The headline was, "We lost an angel last night." Well, she happened to be killed on a street that was around the corner from where I grew up. I used to play stickball on that street. And when I heard about it, I wasn't in homicide. I was the chief of trials, just like this one. And I called the DA up and I said, "Joe, I want this case if there's an arrest." And he goes, "Wow, you got this to do." I said, "I grew up on that street. I know exactly everything about that street. I want it." A year later, I'm sitting at my desk, and the head of the homicide bureau walks into my office and he says, "Mike, I think they got somebody for her name was Amy Watkins, the Amy Watkins killing. They're at the 7-7 precinct, in Bed-Stuy. We got to go." I said, "Okay, but if there's a confession, you're taking it because I'm going to try the case." He says, I know. And he gets a confession. Well, during the time that after the indictment, after as we were preparing for trial, I called her father. Her father was a professor, a teacher in Jersey, and he was she was his be all and end all. She was just everything to him. And when I called him, he said, "I need to come in and talk to you." And this is another family now that I get to know. I got to
Right.
know, and he got to know me after the conviction. And I write about this in the book. It's the first case that Gioca is involved in. He doesn't know it, but at this time he was being watched by this secret group that was recruiting him to fight the devil. And the case that he was involved with, this Amy Watkins case, was instigated by the devil in the book. And at the end of the case, I go outside into the hallway outside the courtroom, and Mr. Watkins is there, and he gives me this. He grabs me and he engulfs me in this hug, and he's beyond thanking me. And I said, "Mr. Watkins, this is my job. This is what I did." He said, "Mike, you have no idea what you have done for my family. We now have closure. At least we know that the person who took Amy from us will be spending, the rest of his life in jail." And that, to me, it's obviously I've never forgotten it, because I'm telling you word for word, and Gioca becomes me. And in the first book, the first story is about that killing, and that's where
So,
he
Mike,
learned.
Gioca in the book, the
Yeah,
prosecutor, is really you. It has all the
yes,
attributes of you. It's your stories, and you just changed the name to protect you, the innocent. They're not so innocent, but you changed the name
yes,
from
you know,
Vecchione to Gioca. So he's got a lot of your attributes, probably personality and all the feelings and everything that you put into this character. That is actually your
yes.
feeling from being a Brooklyn district attorney and all the
Growing
way
up in
you
Brooklyn.
felt
Yeah,
growing up in Brooklyn,
yeah,
dealing with the families. And I mean, an amazing thing. I had another Hofstra law grad recently on my show, and you may even know him, Bobby Chacon, who's an FBI agent.
Yeah, I know the
And
name. I don't think I know
he
him. Yeah,
writes now. He's a talking head on TV, but he writes for television now. And he's always complaining, or he complains to me and on the show, so it's to everybody, that they want these new young MFA graduates that have no life experience. They write woke bullshit in
yeah.
these things. He'll come up with true stories, and they want to change the character from the
The
FBI
television.
agent, this big
Yeah,
gruff guy, to a female Asian who's gay. You're like, it's like, what are you doing to my story?
yeah,
It's
yeah. No,
is
it's
that
true.
happening to
Listen,
you at all?
well, I'll tell you what happened. The first book I did, well, the second actually, Friends of the Family was the first book. The second book I did was Crooked Brooklyn, and it was very popular. And I had an agent, and they were going to Hollywood. And my boss Joe Hines' son, Kevin Hines, he was a lawyer, DA in Manhattan, and he went out to Hollywood and he became a writer out there. And I give him Crooked Brooklyn, and he says, "Don't do anything with it until you hear from me again, because I know some people who are interested." And I said, "Okay, that's great." So he calls me one day. He says, "Would you mind if the person who wants to do your story, who do this book, makes your character a black woman?" So I said, "Kevin, I couldn't care less if you got a polka dotted guy with a tail and 3 ears. It don't make a difference to me. Is someone going to?" But immediately, that's what the point was. The point was to make it, to make it more. Now they use the term woke and more inclusive. It's unfortunate, but writing even this novel, I am conscious of making sure that I make it so that if I'm going to try to sell it, that some jerk out in Hollywood's not going to tell me, "Well, everybody in your stories is a white male. I can't do anything with this."
Well, Mike,
So yeah,
that's part of being authentic. You're writing this book from the perspective of an Italian American who grew up in Brooklyn, and that's
yeah,
important to your story and important to your point of view. If these people want to change shit, let them invent it themselves. You know what I mean? Like, no, you're not changing my
yeah,
shit. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, look, I was so apropos that bullshit show East New York went off the air because it was that
you didn't
police
like it?
show. They tried to make it so woke, and I watched it.
Yeah,
I cringed. I even cringe when I watch Blue Bloods, because they inject this liberal bullshit into the
yeah,
police show that has no business being in it. And it's
I agree.
every time I see that, I can't watch this show.
Well, the other thing that they have done now recently is that they've made prosecutors different than what the real prosecutors are supposed to be. And again, it's the idea that the prosecutor has to make sure that the person who's not the victim, but who's the bad guy or bad girl, is taken care of, and you have to express your sorrow for them and for doing. Look, the bottom line is we have free will. Those people did what they did because they wanted to do it, not because of somebody in society telling them, go ahead and do it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. The
Well,
idea,
Mike,
though, Bill.
even the disingenuousness of um, the conviction integrity unit. I love when they grab a case and they said he did 25 years for a crime he didn't commit. No, he did it. He did it, but you were choosing to go and say he didn't, and you can't retry it because 25 years have gone by. All the witnesses are dead. All the evidence is gone.
Exactly.
He did it. So stop the bullshit. And they do that with so many cases, and people are really believing, oh, you believe this guy did 25 years for a crime he didn't? Look, that's 1 in a million, the guy who didn't commit the crime. That is 1 in a million.
Look, I had that experience as well. Unfortunately, I did. And the reason that we ultimately had to dismiss the case after it was, we were able to prove that we didn't do anything wrong, was because there was nobody around to testify. They were all gone. And I can't tell you what kind of crap I took for that case. And I did everything by the books, everything by the book, Bill. I did nothing wrong, and I took a lot of crap. I really did.
Yeah,
And
they want to point the finger at you, like you
yeah,
didn't do it by the
absolutely.
book. Look at the Central Park 5 case. Look what they did to Linda Fairstein and
Yep.
the prosecutor to that. That those kids did it. They were, I mean, I can't say they did the rape, but they were in the park beating the shit out of people, robbing people, and they may have done acting in concert. So to just claim these kids were flaked by the system is it's an
Yep.
outrage.
Well, there's so, you hit right on. Actually, people ask me this question too. Where'd you get the idea of this, the devil being involved with this thing? Well, I tell them the cases that I was involved in, and there are cases that I wasn't involved in, but that I read about. You have to understand that evil is the only answer for somebody who would do what this particular individual did. I mean, that's the answer. And the next story in book 2 of Fallen Angel was a case that, actually, I'm sorry, the last story in book 1. I remember when I tried the case. When I tried the case, I said to the jury in my summation, the only explanation for this guy doing what he did is he has to be the devil. He has to be Satan. And that always stuck in my head. And so that was the beginning of this, this whole idea. This guy was so bad that when he killed this young woman, young Hasidic Jewish woman on the Williamsburg Bridge one Sunday morning, because he was looking for money for drugs, and she was doing exercise on the bridge, and he accosted her, and she had no money on her. She didn't carry any money because she was not going anywhere other than this exercise. And he dragged her down to a lonely part of the bridge, and he strangled her with her own scarf. It was winter. And then to make her, I'm going to tell you how bad this was. To make it seem as if it was a sex crime, he strips her of her clothes, and he violates her with his fingers and his hand, and bruises her. And that's not enough. He talks to a friend of his, and they go back that night, and they light her up, and they pour gasoline on her, and they burn the body. Burn the body. You know what was left of her, Bill? And I put this in my summation, and Gioca does the same thing. What was left was the clasp for her bra and one shoe. And in my summation, and in Gioca's summation, I say that after this guy, the devil did what he did, all that was left is, and I put the bra clasp and the shoe on the jury rail. I said, that's what we have left of this young woman. How do you explain something like that other than evil had to be imbued in this guy's psyche and in his body to kill this young, innocent woman, not because he was stealing from her, but because she had no money. She had no money.
Mike, I just want to touch upon that for 1 second. The concept of evil, and I've been doing this podcast now for 4 years. There are many people out there that don't believe in that, and they want to
I
make the
know that.
excuse that it's mental illness, that they don't believe in evil, because then evil, if you believe in evil, you sort of have to believe in God. You sort of have to
Yeah.
believe in good and evil.
Yep.
So because they don't believe in a higher being, they don't believe in God, how can they possibly believe in evil? So when I say this was pure evil, oh, who are you to say? Look, don't listen. There's another podcast. Go listen to that. But I believe in evil, and I happen to believe in God. And so if you don't like that, then you're in the wrong place. Go to the atheist podcast, the atheist police off the cuff or whatever. But I've seen evil, and you have seen evil. And
Absolutely.
I think most people out there have seen evil. And if you don't accept that concept, then perhaps you go join a woke police show or something, or write for one. You know?
Well, listen, if what I just told you wasn't enough about this one particular guy, what happened was after he kills this woman on the bridge, he gets away with it for a long time. And what he does in between the homicide on the bridge and his ultimate arrest is he was living, a good friend of his was allowing this junkie bum to live in his house sometimes and to stay there. He would give him money, he would give him food, and he was a very nice guy to him. And one time, this he and the junkie and another guy, another woman actually, and a woman I should say, go to this guy's house and ask him for money. They said, listen, we need some money. He says, I'm done with you. I got you into rehab. You can't, you came out of rehab. I give you food. I let you stay here. I give you money. I'm done. You know what they do? They kill him. The guy kills his best friend, the guy who was putting food in his mouth, steals his credit card, steals his wallet, and begins to use his credit cards all around Brooklyn. And what happens is he gets a prostitute. He hires a prostitute. She becomes his girlfriend, and she goes on these spending sprees with him and this other woman, and somebody recognizes her, and they tip off the detectives, not to the bridge case, but to this other case, and they tell them, speak to this woman, and they go and talk to her, and they pick her up, put her in the radio car. I'm sorry, the detective's car, and they're driving it to the precinct, and she says to them, so you're interested in that little girl he killed on the bridge? Bill, they literally stopped short in the car. They had no idea that it was the same guy who had done the woman on the bridge who had killed his best friend. And that's how he gets caught.
And Mike, you being a Catholic and me being a Catholic, you can look at that as divine intervention, because I really want to piss off the atheists listening to this today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Somebody upstairs had to have, was smiling down on the cops that day to get to where we were.
And Mike, sometimes it happens like that. I've had cases like that too.
I'm sure you have.
Mentions it. Oh, he also did this case in the Bronx, and you're like, whoa,
Yep. Well, let me just give you this one last thing. You'll get a kick out of this because of the detective involved. So they set up this meeting where this woman, who is now the informant, is going to meet the bad guy. And they say, listen, don't tip it off, but we're going to arrest him when you meet him. So he smells the fact, or he seizes upon the fact that the cops are there in plain clothes, and he takes off and he starts running. And he runs through the streets of Brooklyn. And there's a detective who was really always dressed well. He had a suit, he had Italian loafers on, and another anti-crime cop in plain clothes with him. The guy runs and jumps over a fence and into an apartment building in Brooklyn. The detective, I'll never forget this, testifies, because I said to him, did you go over the fence? He goes, no. I let the young buck go over the fence. I went around and into the backyard and into the house. Wait. So they go into this apartment building. It's like 4 stories. They start to go up the stairs. He, the bad guy, now has gone to the top floor. There's no place else to go. He's knocking on doors, let me in, and nobody lets him in. So he finds this ladder that leads to the roof. But before he gets to the roof, there's a crawl space between the ceiling of the top floor apartment and the roof, the floor of the roof. And he goes into it, and he's hiding in there, except that it couldn't support him, and he falls through it. He falls onto the apartment below, onto the bedroom. There are 2 people in bed having sex. He falls right on top of them. and they are now shocked out of their minds. They're screaming. Now the cops know where he is. They get into the apartment and they arrest him. That's how the case. And once again, if they didn't know that there was the crawl space there and never looked at it, he would have gotten away. But once again, I think you're right. Divine intervention made that guy fall through the ceiling onto the bed of these.
Like who would believe that also that you could make that up? That really happened, because you couldn't make that up.
Absolutely. So when people say to me, well, you're writing a novel, and I say, well, it's a true crime. I called it a true crime fantasy because the crimes are all true, but the thing that ties them together is this idea of the prosecutor against the devil. So that's where the fantasy comes in. So that's how I got the idea. But once again, Bill, it's a case that it was the first. I left the DA's office. I don't know if you know that. I was in the DA's office for like 8 years, and then went to private practice for a long time, and then went back when Heinz became DA. They asked me to come back, and I went back. The first case I got was the one I was just telling you about the bridge, and this whole story about this guy falling through the ceiling, etc. And I was saying to myself at that time, man, I couldn't make this up. And when the guy gave this confession to one of the other ADAs, not to me, he said to him, essentially, not that I'm happy that you caught me, but she comes to me every night in my dreams. She haunts me. This little girl that he killed, she haunts me. And he gets on the stand at his trial, and he denies everything on direct. He said, I didn't confess. The cops made it up, all this kind of stuff. So when I stood up, and I have Gioca doing this in the book, when he stands up for his cross-examination to start his cross, he doesn't do it right away. He kind of lets things settle down. And then he says to him, his name was Raymond. He says to him, Raymond, did she come to you last night in your dreams? And he literally in the courtroom that I saw, he starts to shake, Bill, on the witness stand. I said, did she tell you to lie? She tell you to say what you just said to the jury, which you know is a lie? And he goes, oh, what are you talking about? He's all flustered. I had him. And Gioca has him. At that point, it's all over. The rest was history. And so once again, I took something that was real. The inspiration was an actual event that I participated in. And now it became part of, this story that I've been writing. So,
Mike,
that,
it's even you telling me these stories. I get that feeling of this is the kind of case that you get that special feeling when it's solved that
oh yeah.
good did prevail over evil, and
Yep.
this evil person is now never going to see the light of day again. Only a cop or a DA can appreciate this
Yeah.
because it's really, society. Maybe a lot of people, there's so many blinders put over everyone's eyes these days. We got to feel sorry for. No, we don't have to feel sorry. This is an evil piece of shit that belongs in prison, And
Yeah.
I just, when I hear all the crap that some people try to sell to everybody, even when I was talking about that conviction integrity unit, yes, yeah, 1 out of 100 people maybe but they're trying to release people that are guilty just because they want to empty the prisons, and it's really pathetic.
And the prosecutors also, the DA also have the other agenda, which is to make sure that the guy who has been taking care of them in terms of campaign contributions, this guy Soros, is happy. So if they're progressive, so to speak, well then he's gonna make sure that he takes care of them and contributes to their campaign. That's why they do this stuff.
But Mike, is that justice, or that's corruption in my
Oh,
mind?
absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Bill, I got to tell you, with that case with the girl on the bridge, when I first met her father was a cobbler in Williamsburg, and he wouldn't talk to me. Wouldn't talk to me because it had been a year between the incident and the arrest, and he blamed the cops, he blamed everybody. So I tried to get into his confidence, and I said to him, oh, my grandfather was a cobbler from Italy, and I know the store, I know that what you're doing, etc. Nothing, Bill, nothing. He
yeah.
gave me nothing. After the conviction, after the young girl he didn't come to court. He didn't even come to watch the case. But after the conviction, I heard from people in the neighborhood that he was just very, very pleased and thankful for what we had done. So I know you mentioned before about the connection to families and what we do, what you did and what I do. We did it not only for society and for justice, but we also did it for the families that have lost people who will never come back. And people say, well, you didn't bring back of course I didn't. Only God can resurrect somebody. I wasn't
Right.
doing that. But what I did was, what we did was to give closure to these families and at least allow them to be able to enjoy the idea that somebody who did something so horrific to their family is now being punished for it. So it's I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really is why I did what I did. quite frankly. Certainly wasn't for money, that's for sure. So,
No, well,
you know,
look, you left and you went to private practice, which I'm sure you made a lot more money. But a lot of I've seen a lot of DAs that left and came back just because they love the job. They
absolutely.
really
That's why I
love,
did it. No
yeah.
doubt.
And
No doubt it.
the
No doubt
feeling you get
about
when just those two cases you mentioned, to just how many lawyers get a case like that during their whole career? Not
it. Right.
well, in New York City, you probably get DAs get a lot of those great cases,
You get your
Manhattan,
share.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, you get your share. But well, I was very lucky that I have look, if you looked over to my left here, you'd see boxes, and there what's in there are basically the summations that I did, and any other things that I took with me from the DA's office and now I use them. I use that stuff in writing, but for the most part, it's right here. The the case I'm writing now in book 3, the first opening case, was the killing of 2 New York City police officers, on the street in Brooklyn by a guy who was involved in the Attica riots. He was the guy who started it, quite frankly, and he was a member of, at that point, the Black Liberation Army. And he got out and he was going to pull off a robbery, and these 2 cops saw him on the street, and they went up to him, and he shot and killed both of them. And in the gunfire, his compadre got killed as well. So that's what I'm writing about now. Now, I don't have any, that happened a long time ago, and I don't have anything that I kept with me about that, but I don't need it because it's all up here. It's one of those things, as you know. I'm sure there are cases in your head that you'll never forget, and you remember details that that someone will say to you. How do you remember that
Right,
particular?
right.
Well, I do. In this case, the one I'm writing about right now is that one, and it lends itself to the devil being involved. I mean, who kills two guys just because they walk up to you and they assassinate him? He assassinates these two cops. It was a horrific case. It really was. So it's the idea is that I had so many of these kinds of quote unquote big cases or horrific cases, that the devil being involved in this, and that idea to wrap the stories together really kind of was perfect for me, because I had a lot of them. So
That's amazing. Mike, we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to go much
okay,
longer than an hour, even though this is fascinating. And again, I always say to you, you're welcome to come back. I know you're going to be more
anytime,
prolific and put
Bill.
out more books, but when I put up this here, we got Fallen Angel is Mike's latest book, a true crime fantasy. The one before that, Homicide is My Business, which is equally a great book. Luigi the Zip, great organized crime book. And to me, one of the greatest stories, I think, is Friends of the Family, because that is a great story. Probably, and we've said it one other time, we got in a little trouble with somebody. I won't mention the guy's name, but we said it was the biggest corruption case in the history of the New York City Police Department.
I
And
still believe.
I believe it myself.
Yeah.
How could you beat 2 detectives, on duty detectives, that were killing people for the mob? Is there any other corruption than murder? People,
Nope.
someone, a gold shield detective killing people for organized crime? I don't think so. And that story, Mike, should be either a movie or a TV series. It's
Well,
fantastic, and it
you're,
just
you're you must be it must be like a soothsayer, Bill, because we now have optioned Friends of the Family again. Tommy Dades, who worked on the case with me, and once again we were kind of, now we're being held back by this strike in Brooklyn. The guy who has optioned it is someone who's been around for a while, and he grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up in Brooklyn, as did the writer who wrote the pilot, who has written the pilot for the Fallen Angel book. So this guy has told me, the guy who's now optioned the Friends of the Family, told me, he said, when I first heard that, I wanted it, and you guys sold it to Warner Brothers before I had a chance to put together a group to buy it. So it's a long time ago, but he's finally come around to the way, and he's done it. He's optioned it, and he's in talks with some pretty big people out in Hollywood now to bring it to what we're hoping for is a limited series, on like a Netflix or one of those streaming stations. So you're right. It's a great story. Look, Bill, I got to tell you, when we did that case and the arrest was made, Jerry Schmetterer, who wrote the other books with me, who was the head of in charge of the DA's office, public information office, was getting calls by people who wanted to write this book. They were asking for me, asking, can we speak to Mike? Can we speak to Mike? Can we speak to Mike? We had so many people wanting to do this story that we held an auction for the book rights. That's how many people were interested, and we sold it to the highest bidder. And it turned out to be terrific. You know, it turned out to be a terrific book, and it'll make a great story. It'll make a great TV show.
I think it'll be great. The only thing I ask is that you give me a little small part in it. If it,
you got it. I promise
just
that you do.
let me play a duty captain, anything.
Yeah, you know, you could play the guy who finds, you know, Eppolito and Caracappa. You know, Caracappa and Eppolito stop this guy Bobby Lino on the side of the Bell Parkway because he's one of the people who was who was attempting to kill Gaspipe Casso, which is the kind of the centerpiece of the story. And when they go up to him and they stop him, they go into ask him to roll down a window, and Eppolito says to him, "We're looking for I forgot what Eddie Lino." He goes, "No, he's Eddie. They're looking for." He says, "We're looking for Bobby." He said, "No, that's my cousin, fellas. You know, I'll tell you where he is, but it's not me." And as he's talking, Eppolito says, "What's that down there on the side at the foot of the passenger seat?" And when he leans over to look, Caracappa shoots him and kills him.
Wow.
And he breaks his watch, and it's found at the scene. So that's your role. You'll be the guy that in crime scene who finds the watch, and
that's okay with me. Mike, it was great conversation with you. Final words before we say goodbye.
Well, I would urge everyone who likes true crime to buy Fallen Angel 1 and 2. It's a series, and wait for 3. Believe me, when I tell you that they are true crime books, they are. It's just that I put a fantasy around them to tie them together. So I think you'll enjoy them. And as always, Bill, I thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to your listeners and viewers.
Thank you so much, Mike. And even though it was an hour and 2 minutes, it goes fast. And I feel like I could go for 2 hours, but I don't want to make, we got to, so I'll bring you back. I'll bring you back.
Yeah, do that. Okay. You heard that, everybody, right? He's going to bring me back. So very good. Anytime, Bill. Anytime.
All right, Mike, have a great day now.
You too. Thank you.
One episode